Hey everybody, welcome to, I guess, this one-off type video, where I had a request actually to kind of chat about the, in particular the English football leagues, the structure and how it all works, and I thought I'd kind of extend that to Europe as a whole, and just kind of discuss, I guess, the way the kind of European football scene is set up. Not necessarily the actual base rules of football or anything like that, or soccer as it goes, because I often forget that about 50%, I guess, of my subscriber base is from America, and I guess a lot of you guys are probably not too aware of the sort of European sports scene, mostly because you've got some pretty fantastic sports going on in your own country, I guess. So I thought, I kind of liked the idea of kind of explaining the way the European system of football works, the league structure, etc. And we're actually in Football Manager 2017 to help me explain that. So it's 2017, which is why it's a little bit behind in terms of it's still got like Sunderland, Middlesbrough and Hull. The new 2018 one's not out yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to get it. I didn't actually play very much of this when it came out, mostly because this game, as wonderfully in-depth and amazing as it is, there is no other time sink like this game. And, unless I probably quit my job, which is not really viable, I don't think I'd be able to do it justice. So I think there comes a point in every man's life where he has to walk away from Football Manager, because boy, it's more of a lifestyle than a game. But anyway, we're here, and I guess this is also as good a time as any to kind of say that I am going to do a series on FIFA 18. So I've been doing one on FIFA 17 with the Ultimate Team. I thought in FIFA 18 I'd mix it up a bit and do a kind of career mode. Most likely using the club I support, Crystal Palace, and seeing if we can do better than Crystal Palace currently are, which shouldn't be difficult. We just have to score a goal in the first 6 games. But yeah, I thought I'd do that because I do enjoy playing football games. I think people enjoy them on the channel, and it's nice to do something a bit different than the Ultimate Team stuff. So yeah, that's going to be coming. But anyway, here we are to chat about the league system and how it all kind of works, because I know it's probably very, very different to how things work in America, and actually some other countries as well. So we have in England, we have the English Premier League, which is the top division. Okay, there's 20 clubs in there from all across England, and also Wales is included, even though it's called the English Premier League. There are clubs from Wales. For example, Swansea is in Wales, and Cardiff used to be in the Premier League, which are a Welsh club as well. So Wales is included, although Scotland, Northern Ireland both have their own football leagues as well, which are separate from that. The general gist of it is you have 20 clubs. They play each other home and away to leave 38 games in the season. You get 3 points for a win, you get 1 point for a draw, and you get 0 points for a loss. The team with the most points at the end of the season wins the league. They are the champions. There's no playoffs. There's no one-off games to decide anything. In a league system, it is simply the most consistent team, I guess, over the course of the 38 games wins the league. So yeah, now in the English Premier League there is a lot of other things going on as well. So we have first, second, third and fourth place go into the European Cup, also known as the Champions League, although it doesn't actually really feature champions if you have fourth place going in, but that's besides the point. That's commonly known as the kind of like the apex of, I guess, football in Europe, the Champions League. It's perhaps not as important as it used to be to a lot of clubs financially. The Premier League itself financially is worth around 170 million to a club each season in television rights alone. The Champions League adds on more money. It's more about the prestige of the Champions League. That's a lot of the time where the top players in the world want to play. So if a club's in the Champions League, it can allow them to attract better players to their club through there. So first, second, third and fourth go in. Where it gets slightly complicated is around the next few positions. So you have kind of like fifth place, which is the Europa League or the Europa Cup position. The Europa Cup is like the secondary European competition, I guess. It's not as rich as the Champions League. It's not as prestigious, but it is still a very good competition. And winning the UEFA Cup guarantees you entry into the Champions League the next season. Man United won it last season and therefore guaranteed entry into the Champions League this season, despite finishing outside of the top four. As I said, where things get complicated is that sometimes you can gain entry to UEFA through UEFA Cup. Sorry, I'm calling it the UEFA Cup because it's what it used to be called many years ago. The Europa League. Also through things like fair play. So if your team has the fewest like yellow cards in Europe, you can often gain entry. And also, for example, if it kind of gets complicated where if a team wins the Champions League but finishes in this top four position, then there's all sorts of different variations which can come out for which teams go in. But generally, between first and sixth generally gets you into Europe. The Champions League being the biggest deal, and then the Europa League is also a pretty big deal. A lot of teams don't like the Europa League because it's seen as a secondary competition, and also because whereas the Champions League is played on a Tuesday or Wednesday evening, the Europa League is played on a Thursday, which means that if you're playing at the weekend, usually you're going to be playing on a Sunday, and it leaves less rest and recuperation time for your players. I don't generally believe that to be a thing. I think people use it as an excuse to field weakened teams in the Europa League because a lot of people just don't really rate it, which is disappointing because it is still a European competition. But it is slightly weakened by another variation, but I'll go into that later on. Anyway, we'll stick to the Premier League for now. So then you get to like say 7th to 17th, and there's not a lot going on here. 18th, 19th, 20th is where it gets interesting. You'll see that they're kind of a darker colour. That's because that is the relegation zone. Relegation is a big thing in football leagues, particularly in Europe, because generally the way it works is the top tier league of a country is where the money is. That's where the prestige is, that's where the money is. And if you're not in that league, that severely inhibits your ability to attract players and to buy players financially, and just the financial stability of your football club. So what happens if you finish in 18th, 19th or 20th in the Premier League? You get relegated to the Sky Bet Championship. And vice versa. The top two teams in the Championship get promoted automatically. And then the 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th play playoff games. 3rd v 6th first, 4th v 5th, and then the winners of that go to a final, which decides who goes up. So 3 teams go up, 3 teams go down. Same again in the Championship. You have 3 people getting relegated. They go into the League One. Same thing happens again. 2 automatically promoted, and then you have a playoff between those 4 teams. But then 4 teams get relegated. They go into League 2, where 4 teams get promoted, 3 automatically, and then 1 through a playoff system. And then 2 teams get relegated into what is known as the non-league, even though it is a league. It's kind of, I've always thought it was kind of strange that a country as small as England, and we are a small country, really, in the scheme of things, people, population-wise, and certainly geographically, can support 4 leagues of professional football, but we do. So all these teams are professional football teams, which mean that all their players are full-time professional footballers. Once you start getting down into the non-league scene, so the Vanarama National League, some teams here may be semi-professional, which means they may pay some fees to players, but players will most likely have a second job. You'll have to excuse my voice a little bit. I have a bit of a cold at the minute. But let me just have a drink. So as I said, the teams generally around here, some of them may be professional. Certainly the ones who get relegated and promoted frequently may well still be professional, because it doesn't automatically mean you become semi-professional in this league. It's mostly about money, being able to afford to pay players wages and things like that is where it's at. So yeah, we have that kind of system, I guess, which can be very complicated and can also lead to massive swings in clubs' fortunes. From the way I see it in kind of American sports, you may have like different divisions, like split across the country, because geographically it's huge, obviously, and whereas Arsenal can travel to, say, Sunderland, which is in the north of England, and it'll only take a few hours, a couple of hours by plane probably. In America, I know it's like crossing time zones and things like that to get across the country. So geographically it's obviously led to some differences. But what is kind of interesting is that in English football especially, clubs can have massive falls from grace. And let me try and find a club. So I guess it was only maybe like 10 years ago, a team like Bolton were in the Premier League under a manager called Sam Allardyce, who is an ex-England and Crystal Palace manager. They were in the Premier League, doing pretty well. They're now in League One. Have we got anybody in League Two? Portsmouth are a big one. Portsmouth, again, maybe like 10 years ago, were in the Premier League. We're doing very well. I think they even won the FA Cup as well, which is a cup competition. We'll go into that later. And then had a spectacular fall from grace. And generally what happens is it's down to money. So what happens when you leave the Premier League is you not only lose about 170 million a year, you also lose the prize money from the Premier League, which we'll go through in a second. And then you get dumped into the Championship, where your TV money goes from about 170 million to like 20 million. So any business which has that dramatic cut in revenue is going to be affected. Now, you're not affected totally, because you do have what are called parachute payments, where the club will receive money from the Premier League. I think it's over 4 seasons, to kind of help cushion the blow, because if you have a team where players are on a lot of money and then suddenly your revenue's cut by 150 million, you can't afford to pay those players anymore. And that's where you see teams fall from grace, like with Portsmouth, where they suddenly have to just get rid of all their players, and they just spiral basically out of control. Some teams can afford, at least for a season, to retain a lot of players. Newcastle kind of did that pretty well. They retained a lot of players. They did have to sell some who were on the kind of biggest wages, or just players didn't want to play in the Championship. And as a result, they managed to go straight back up again. So they won the league in this season in 2017, or what was called the 2016-17 season. Seems to be a fox outside. It's about 1 in the morning, and the fox is having some fun outside. Bless them. So yeah, as I said, it can have a devastating effect on the football club you support by getting relegated, but that's kind of what makes it exciting, because the stakes are so high. It's not just a case of, oh, we're out of the running of finishing in the top 6 or whatever, so the season's kind of finished. It's like, no, we have to make sure we don't get relegated, because it can, as I said, it has a devastating effect on your team. It's probably especially potent in England, because the Premier League is such a rich league. It's the richest league in the world in terms of TV money. So that drop is pretty devastating for teams who go down. So let's go overview the rules, I guess. So here we go. 20 teams, as I said, 3 points for a win, 1 for a draw, 38 games. Each team plays twice. Okay, so you can have a maximum squad size of 25 players and a minimum of 8 players trained in the same nation for 3 years before the 21st birthday. So this is a rule to kind of combat teams just bringing in foreign players. The idea being, or one of the things that the Premier League has found, is that because it's so rich, clubs are buying players from all over the world. They're trying to get the best players from all over the world, which has made for a very exciting league, because it has obviously some of the greatest players in the world playing in it. But it's also led to the detriment of the English national team, because a lot of players can't get games. A lot of bright, young, talented players cannot get games. Such examples being Marcus Rashford, say, at Man United, who, while he is playing a lot more this season, Man United have this young, exciting English striker, and then they went and spent 60-70 million on Romelu Lukaku, who is obviously still a fairly young player, and he's going to be their kind of number one striker ahead of Rashford. So by bringing in restrictions on the number of foreign players you can have, then it kind of hopefully will encourage teams to play English players. Doesn't quite work out like that, because if you notice the way that ruling works is a minimum of 8 players trained in the same nation for 3 years before 21st birthday. So it doesn't actually specify they have to be English. It could be that a team buys a 16-year-old from France, and by the time he's 19, he counts as what is classed as a homegrown player. So it doesn't quite work like that. If 2 teams are tied on the same points, goal difference is the first thing to sort them out. Whoever's the better goal difference, so in other words, who has so goal difference is the goals you've scored minus the goals you've conceded. Whoever has the better or higher number is the one who goes above the other team. And goals scored, then if goal difference is the same, goals scored is then the same. If that's also the same, I can't remember what they do, but there was nearly a situation, I think, last season where that nearly came in. I can't remember what they do, to be honest with you. And then we get to prize money. So finishing in different positions in the league grants you different amounts of money. So you can see there's a huge difference between finishing, say, 20th, where you just get 2 million to the nearly 40 million you get from first in terms of prize money. So although it may feel like sometimes teams battling it out for, like, if you're not going to finish in the top 6 in Europe, there's not much point in, as long as you don't get relegated, there's not much point. But really, finishing 6th is 26 million. That's 19 million more than finishing in 17th, which is pretty much the price of a good player nowadays in there. So that can make a big difference as well for teams. Bottom 3 are relegated. Continental qualification. So top 3 teams qualify for European Champions Group stage. Team in 4th position qualifies for the European Champions Cup best place playoff. So the way this works is you have in the Champions Cup or Champions League, whatever you want to call it, before you get to the actual league stage, which I will go through, they have playoffs between teams who finished in certain positions, like 4th in the English League, in weaker leagues. Say, for example, in Scotland, the team which finishes first goes into the playoffs. And I think it's the same for like Scandinavian leagues and some other minor leagues. If they win those playoffs, they get into the Champions League itself. So the 4th place team doesn't automatically qualify, but generally in England, the 4th place team is generally far superior to a lot of the other teams they play in the playoff, so they are expected to qualify. Teams placed 5th and 6th qualify for the European Eurocup group stage, and team in 7th position qualifies for the Eurocup 3rd qualifying round, depending on the winners of the FA Cup and the FL Cup, which we'll go into in a bit. You have yellow cards and red cards. A red card means you get sent off from the pitch. Yellow card is like a warning, but if you receive 5 yellow cards, then you get a 1-match ban. 3-match ban after 15 yellow cards. That's pretty good going though, to get 15 yellow cards. Yeah, and then bans for red cards, etc., etc. And then you get different offences. So 1-match ban for striking another player minor, so it might just be a push or something. 2 matches for violent conduct, striking another player, and then 5 for an extremely striking, so punching another player. 12 match for striking a match official. And then we'll get into the kind of transfer window, because I know this is also where this differs a lot from, say, American kind of competitions, because I don't know too much about the American system, but I know there's like a drafting system in like definitely like the NFL, and I believe like there's like a trade system as well. They do things slightly differently in football. So we have we have what are called transfers, I guess, and teams have to pay for another player to join them. It's essentially them buying out the contract of the player and what that player is worth to the club who owns them, technically, I guess you could say. So there are what are called transfer windows. So for the Premier League, it opens June the 9th to the 31st of August. This varies depending sometimes on different the way the days fall and stuff like that. This year I think it was September the 1st actually closed, if I remember rightly, but it's always around there basically. And what that means is the clubs are only permitted to make transfers during that window. After that, they're stuck with whatever they've got. Which is why we have this thing every season in England called Transfer Deadline Day, where a lot of clubs will seek to do the deals on the last day, because it's generally considered that that's when, say, a club who wants to get rid of a player, they'll drop their prices just to get rid of them, because it's the last day they can get rid of them. Imagine it's like walking into a supermarket and buying something which the supermarket has to get rid of that day. The use by date is then, and they do it cheap, don't they? It doesn't always work like that, and it's a high risk kind of high reward strategy, but there is obviously that risk. the way that transfers work, if I kind of go into the squad kind of section here, a player has a value, okay? That value is decided by the club who owns them. So in Football Manager, they're given this kind of value here. It's a bit arbitrary in terms of value. In the same way, how much a football player is worth is actually how much a team is willing to spend to buy them. So, one of the issues that English teams face is because everybody knows the English league is rich. As a result, prices for other players go up because they know these teams have money. So it's a well-known fact. This is genuinely true. Where if a Premier League comes in for a player from, say, Germany or Italy, the price will be about 10 million more than if it was a team from within their own league or another European league, because they know the Premier League's got the money and they're willing to spend it. I mean, honestly, it's business, isn't it? At the end of the day, if you know someone's got the money to spend, then you're not going to give them a discount, are you? So generally the way like a transfer will work is another club will make a bid on a player to buy out their contract, effectively, is what they're doing. So if, for example, Liverpool came in and wanted to buy Christian Benteke, they could turn around and make a bid of 23 million, say, for Christian Benteke, and say, hey, we want to pay you 23 million. Crystal Palace can then decide whether or not to accept or decline that bid. If they decided to accept it, then they would then Christian Benteke would meet with Liverpool and decide on his contract, what that would be. If they both, if Crystal Palace were happy with the fee and Christian Benteke was happy with the contract, then that transfer would go through. Liverpool would pay 23 million to Crystal Palace, and Benteke would get his new contract and what's called a signing on fee as well for joining the club. But Crystal Palace are within their rights to just decline that bid, and there's nothing Liverpool can do. So Christian Benteke would remain a Crystal Palace player unless he had something in his contract which said he had a release clause. You don't often see release clauses within the English Premier League. It's something which generally happens in other European leagues, especially Spain, where a player will have a release clause to say if a club offers X amount of money, then the club has to accept that bid, and the player can negotiate with the club about a transfer. Generally, though, these release clauses are well in excess of the value of the player, and Neymar being a very good example. But in England, generally, we don't have release clauses. The only release clauses you may find would be, I'm trying to find a player who might have one. Let's go to, say, not Jack Wilshere, Callum Wilson. Okay, well, what they have, I could search forever possibly to find one, but what they have sometimes is a relegation release clause, which means that if the team is relegated from the Premier League, then for a fee which is generally around or lower than the value of the player, what is considered the general value of the player, they will be allowed to leave the club. I'm just seeing, no, nobody here seems to have a relegation release clause. So a lot of the time, when a club gets relegated, they will lose a lot of their players because their relegation release clauses will be activated by teams within the Premier League, because they know they can get a pretty good deal on those players who, of course, the irony there is the player got relegated, so are they good enough to play in the Premier League? But that's a whole different subject. And so, yeah, that's the way generally transfers work. You then have the loan system. So I think this is very different as well. I don't think you have this in like America, but the way the loan system works is that a club can loan a player for a period of time to another club. Generally what happens is the club will pay the wages of the player they are loaned, and sometimes even a fee to loan that player. sometimes they will pay a portion. So in the case of Mamadou Sakho, who was loaned from Liverpool, he was on 85,000 a week. Crystal Palace paid 68,000 a week of that money. So Liverpool only had to pay 17,000 of that. The idea behind the loan system is that there's a couple of kind of ideas behind it, I guess. One is that it's generally used with young players. So what can happen is that, especially with these big clubs like Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City, Man United, they'll have very established players in their first team, and it's very difficult for younger players to break through into that. So they are in their kind of under 23 squad. They will often loan out a lot of their players to other clubs so that they get some game time. Usually, well, all the time, basically weaker clubs. A lot of the time in other countries as well. And then those players will get game time there and develop, because match practice is obviously the best way to kind of develop a player. And as a result, they will, the team who is loaning the player, they get a player where perhaps they couldn't afford the transfer fee on, or just that their parent club wouldn't want to sell the player. So they get the opportunity to have that player. A lot of loans can work out very, very well for clubs. Swansea is a great example this season. They loaned a guy called Renato Sanchez from Bayern Munich, who's widely considered to be one of the best young players in Europe. There's no way on earth a club like Swansea would be able to attract a player like that to their club, but to loan him for a season so the player can get some game time and also kind of develop his game in a different country works out well for both clubs. So that's the general gist of it. Some teams can take it to an extreme, Chelsea being one. You can see all these players are loaned out. Chelsea, they have this weird kind of recruitment policy where they buy a lot of young, good players and then loan them out, and then those players never seem to make their way into the general gist of loaning is that you would loan a player out for a few seasons while they're fairly young, and then once they've kind of established, you can see whether or not they're going to turn into a good player or not by their performances at different clubs, and then you would bring them into your first team, I guess, and pay them from there. Chelsea, like a lot of the time, don't seem to do that, which is a little bit weird. They tend to just loan out players and then just sell them. I guess that's their prerogative, do what they want with them. Yeah, I guess that's the way they go. But they have a lot of players out on loan. You can see all these darker blue ones are players which are out on loan. It's a lot of players there. On the plus side, I guess, they are retaining the rights to these players, as in they own them, but are generally not paying their wages. Although what can happen sometimes is a club in a lower league will loan a player from a richer club in the Premier League and then not pay their wages, because their wages might be a few £1,000s a week, and to a Premier League club that's absolute peanuts. So it doesn't really matter. What you do on occasion get as well, and this is probably getting into a bit more of a complex situation, but I'll go over it very loosely. You have what are called work permits as well. Now, for those of you who don't know the way it works, this isn't just in football, but it's in any job whatsoever. UK is currently part of the European Union. The European Union has an agreement where all the countries involved in it, which are most of the countries in Europe, retain free worker movement. So in other words, if I wanted to go and work in Spain or Italy or Germany or Poland, I could go there and get a job, as long as the employer wanted to employ me, obviously, and there would be no permits needed whatsoever. And the same applies to football. So if, for example, Marco van Ginkel is a Dutch player, Chelsea would not need a work permit for him in any way. He could literally just come and play for them. No problems. Where it gets complicated is when the player does not have a valid passport for an EU country. Then they require a work permit. Now, there's no real easy way to describe the way somebody gets a work permit. Where is it? These are the work permit rules. I'm not going to go through all of them. The general gist of it is that the player would have to have played around about 75% of the internationals in the last year, I think, for their whatever national team they played for. So if they were, for example, Brazilian, they would have to have been playing 75% of matches for Brazil. There are some circumstances which differ and vary, and it's very complicated, but but it is kind of different. What this does also lead to is a lot of players suddenly managing to get passports for different European countries. Portugal being one where it seems to be pretty easy for Brazilians and other players, other countries' players, especially footballers, to get Portuguese passports, which then allow them to play for different clubs. Because what you have is a system whereby, let me see where I can find it on here. I've gone where it is now. Let me just have a drink. God, now I've forgotten where to actually... nationalities, that's it. So you have a thing where when a player actually lives in another country in Europe, they, after a certain amount of time, I think this goes for most of the world as well, but after a certain amount of time they can then apply for to gain nationality of that country. In the case of this guy, Luca, he was playing in Greece, and he'd completed 669 days in Greece. That's like 2 years basically, but he needed to complete 2,555 to gain a Greek passport. Now let me try and find somebody who came from what about Jesus Navas? Okay, no, he didn't. So I'm trying to find somebody who I can remember. Gabriel Jesus, that's the one I wanted, I think. Okay, he hasn't got that. That's fine. God, trying to find a player now who I know came from another country recently, but I can't remember any. Or non-EU country, I should say. Liverpool, have you got anybody? Sadio Mane might be a case. Okay, so you can see that different countries have different amount of days. I think Portugal has one of the lowest. I think Belgium as well has one of the lowest. So a lot of the time, what can happen is a big team, especially someone like, say, Chelsea, for example, is they will buy players who cannot get a work permit. For example, this guy Nathan, he's Brazilian, he has no other passport, he can't get a work permit. He's not going to play 75% of the games for Brazil. He can't even play for Chelsea. So what they do is they loan him to another club until he gets a work permit. So either through him becoming an international, or through continuous eligibility at a different club. It happens a lot at Belgium. I think Man United do it quite a lot. So let's have a look at Man United, see if we've got an example here. It's Frankfurt. So I think this happened with Andreas Pereira. Possibly he already had one. I'm not too sure. it can be quite complicated, but what can happen is that they will loan a player out. He's nearly got English nationality here, but a lot of the time they will loan a player out to say a Belgian club or somewhere like that for 3 seasons until that player gets their passport, and then they can come and play in England without a work permit. It's not that common that will happen, but it isn't uncommon, shall we say, amongst teams to do something like that. Also, as I said before, you find a lot of people will have, or a lot of players who will have relatives who are, or they will be able to get work permits for different countries. I guess Matt Miazga is also Polish, so therefore he qualifies for EU workers' rights, which means that he can come to England and play. It does get very complicated. It also gets very complicated, not just from a football sense, but from an actual work sense, because as somebody who works somewhere which does employ people sometimes from outside of the EU, for example, recently, not that recently actually, maybe a year or so ago, where I employed somebody from Colombia because they were here on a student visa, studying, and there were lots of limitations to what they could work and what they could do while they were here, and we had to make sure we abided by all those kind of rules and things like that. So it doesn't always, it can be quite complicated. So I think a lot of the time, generally, football clubs might stay away unless there is an exceptionally talented player who they really want, say a young player who they can bring through. The other thing that's worth remembering is that this kind of work permit type rules only affects the Premier. It only affects the professional leagues, as it were. So, for example, if Man City were to buy a player who was 16 and he came from, say Benjamin Guy's 15, he comes from Argentina, it's irrelevant because he also is Italian. But if he was just Argentinian, they could just train him for 3-4 years till he gets an English passport, and by which time he's only 19 anyway. He probably wouldn't even be playing for the first team. So clubs do get around it that way, where they will buy young players or do things like that. There's a lot of rules around it, and it gets pretty darn complicated. But that's kind of the way that the work permit system works. Now, another thing which has happened over the last maybe I'm trying to think. I think the first time something like this happened was when Roman Abramovich took over at Chelsea. I can't remember when he took over at Chelsea. It does seem like a long time. Let me just actually quickly Google it, because it was really when this whole thing kind of started, I guess. 2003 was when Abramovich took over at Chelsea. Because what happened there was, it was a shift, I guess, in the way football clubs worked, especially in England. Previous to that, there had always been, well, actually, to be fair, that's actually not fair to say about Abramovich, because there were some examples of it previous to that, which I'll go into in a bit. But generally, previously to that, what happened was a football club would be reliant, their income would be reliant upon TV money, prize money, and money that they got from selling tickets to games. As a result of which, kind of the best supported clubs would generally, be the richest clubs, but everybody was generally around about the same. There wasn't like it is now, where there's a kind of an elite league within the league. But what happened when Abramovich took over Chelsea? Chelsea were a club which were very much kind of a mid-table mid-table team in England. And he pumped a lot of his own money into the club, buying a lot of big players. And Chelsea started to take off and started to win a lot of things. And as a result are now one of the biggest teams in England, one of the biggest teams in the world. But this kind of brought the attention, and then other people started to do it as well. Other very, very rich billionaires would take over a football club, because it's kind of an investment in a way. You spend, say, at that time with Abramovich, say he spent 150 million, which sounds like a lot of money and is a lot of money. But if you take a club which was worth, say, 15, 20 million, and you turn that club into one which is worth 200 million, you've made your money back, essentially, if that makes sense. He hasn't sold Chelsea, but if he did sell Chelsea, he would make a massive profit on what he brought it for. But this came to the attention of UEFA, who is like the head of European football, shall we say, the governing body of European football. And once it started to happen, like with a lot of different clubs, Man City fairly recently, PSG a lot more recently, this started to become a problem, because these teams essentially were reliant upon one person's whims. And as we saw many times with different clubs, some clubs in Spain, clubs in England as well, where it happened to, where rich owners would take over and be like, okay, I'm going to be the next Chelsea, and then it wouldn't quite work out, because a lot of the clubs were doing this, and they realised that as much money as they had, sometimes they just couldn't persuade the top players to come to a particular club, because they just didn't want to go to that club. As a result, these owners would then pull out of the club, be like, I'm not going to spend any more money on it. It's a waste of my money. I'm going to go off and do something else. Leaving the club in disarray, because they have signed players who they just cannot afford, with the turnover of the club, to actually pay and keep. And as a result, teams would get into financial difficulty. So they brought in financial fair play. Now, financial fair play is not really very good, because things still happen where a club will pay 200 million for a player. But the theory behind it is that it will restrict teams from overspending, overstretching their finances. So teams must avoid making a loss of more than 15 million over a 3-season period in order to comply with financial fair play regulations. Team must also ensure the player wage expenditure does not increase by more than 7 million on the previous season expenditure, unless this is funded by an uplift in revenue. For example, if you got promoted, you would get a lot more revenue, therefore you could spend a lot more money. Teams that have player wage expenditure less than 67 million are exempt from this restriction. So that's quite a lot of clubs. Failure to comply will result in one of the following sanctions. If remaining in the same division, a points deduction of 5 points. If player wage expenditure increases above allowed limits, a fine of a percentage of the amount overspent will be imposed. The board is allowed to invest a maximum of 90 million towards the calculated income. I don't think any club has ever had a points deduction. Clubs have had fines. The problem with a fine is that if you're fining a club which has already got an owner who is a multi-billionaire, if they're getting a fine of like 500,000, do you think they care less? No. So you have problems where they just don't care, basically. I think stricter penalties have come in. They're talking about banning teams from European competitions if they, overstretch themselves. But we'll see, basically, because at the end of the day, on the one hand, UEFA wants to make sure clubs are not overstretching themselves, but on the other hand, of course, they want clubs like PSG to be doing things like paying 200 million for a player, because it raises the profile of European football, and everyone's looking at it and going, wow, look at this, it's amazing. So it's kind of a half-hearted attempt to try to even things out. But the general rule in football is the rich are getting richer and the poorer clubs are getting poorer. And more needs to be done to try to balance that out if we're going to have competitive leagues. You also get things which are like a total farce, where, for example, in France, Monaco have loaned Kylian Mbappe to PSG. for this season with a view to buying him next season, because PSG obviously spent 20 million on Neymar. As a result, they knew they would be breaking the rules to spend another 100 million on Kylian Mbappe, so they loaned him, which is a kind of a joke, because like there's no way a club like Monaco would loan their best player to their rival in the league. It's essentially a transfer which is not happening until next season, but there you go. So yeah, there is a kind of like a the transfer dealings. There's a lot of shady stuff going on in transfers. Agents as well are a big thing. There's a lot of shady stuff going on in football, basically. As I said, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. That's unfortunately the way of things. So yeah, I guess that's the English Premier League. There's not a lot of difference. We should actually go for the other English competitions, don't we? Because as well as playing in the league, you also have the cups. There are two cups which teams in the Premier League play in: the English FA Cup and what is actually called this season the Carabao Cup, but it's known as the Football League Cup. As a general, the Carabao is being their sponsor. They changed their name based upon their sponsor, basically. The FA Cup is one of the oldest cup competitions in the world. It's used to be a very prestigious competition, although nowadays it has been less so. Cup competitions work out on knockout basis, where a team will play another team. Whoever wins that match will generally go through to the next round of the cup. Okay, there's no actual thing scheduled for this, but sometimes you will get a game which will be two legs, maybe a home leg and an away leg. In the FA Cup they don't have home and away legs, but they do have the semi-finals are played at a neutral venue. In other words, if for example Man United were playing Man City, they might play at they used to be played at a neutral venue. Now they're played at Wembley, which is the national stadium in England. So they play at Wembley, which I personally I dislike a lot, because Wembley should only be used for finals, in my opinion. But money. So the semi-finals played at a neutral venue, basically. Not neutral if you were, say, a London club playing against a northern club, because then the northern fans would have to pay all that money and travel all the way down. But that's a whole other argument. The winner of the FA Cup gets into the Europa League, which is where it devalues the cup, because, as I said before, a lot of teams, especially teams who are competing in the FA Cup, are going to be going into the Champions League anyway. So the prize for winning the FA Cup is pretty poor, in my opinion. It should have a Champions League place as for the winner, and then the fourth place position in the league shouldn't go to the Champions League. It should be the UEFA or Europa League Cup, the second tier European competition. But I think what they worry about, it's a prestige thing, because basically in the FA Cup, amateur teams also play. The FA Cup actually starts way back, now. It started in August time. Okay, teams, I think August, September time. So teams, it's not until around about the third round you see here that the actual Premier League teams actually enter the competition. So they don't enter the competition until January. So the competition starts August, September. Teams are playing, I think, around there. Anyway, let me see. Okay, so so that's the second qualifying round. We don't even have the first qualifying round, but the second qualifying round is played on the 17th of September. So the first qualifying round is before that even. And this is where amateur teams can play each other. And the romance of the English FA Cup is that sometimes, especially when the Premier League teams can enter. You can have a team from like the 4th division, or even sometimes a non-league team, and they'll play against a Man United or a Chelsea, and it's a really big thing for that team because those players are probably semi-professional, or even sometimes not even that, just amateur. There might be plumbers or electricians, and they go into Old Trafford or Stamford Bridge and getting to play against these huge players, and it'll often be televised, and it'll be the greatest days of their lives, basically. But what I think what worries the European thing is that one of these teams one day might make it through. I think we have had it before in the previous winners. If we have a look at the winners of the FA Cup, past winners. So while it's generally won by prestigious teams, you can see Wigan here, 2012, 2013. I think Wigan won this, and I think they got relegated. There was a team who won. It might not have been this, actually. I think it might have been this. Wigan won it, and yeah, it was. Wigan won the FA Cup and got relegated from the Premier League. So it wouldn't do the Champions League from a prestige, we are the Champions League. It wouldn't do them any good to have a team in the Championship, especially a team, like Wigan, who's probably not that fashionable, in the Champions League. So they got into the UEFA Cup. What it does mean, though, is sometimes if the team who wins are in the Champions League, the runner-up will go into the Europa League. Unfortunately, when Crystal Palace, my team, were runners-up, which was very sad. First time we got to the final since 1990, when we lost to Man United again. Man United weren't in the running to get into the Champions League, therefore they took the Europa League place, and Crystal Palace didn't get anything, which is sad because we've never been in Europe. As you can see, some like a Portsmouth can win it. The most famous example is back in 87-88. Wimbledon won it. Wimbledon were a very, very unfashionable team. I don't even know. It says they no longer exist. This is a very complicated subject upon Wimbledon. They actually do exist as the MK Dons. They actually moved. They kind of did something which happens in America a lot, where the franchise moved. Wimbledon was in South London. They moved to Milton Keynes, which is north of London, and rebranded as the MK Dons. This was a travesty and should never have been allowed to happen, but it did. It will probably never happen again because there was an absolute outcry, and still teams hate the MK Dons because this happened. But anyway, that was when they beat a much fancied Liverpool, who were probably the best team in the world in the 80s. And a real underdog story there. Just on a side note of the MK Dons and Wimbledon, what is very funny is that we now have a situation where AFC Wimbledon, which were the team which kind of rose, which was like a fan-funded team almost, which rose up from supporters of Wimbledon being, because imagine if your team you support, and football, if you can imagine, is a very localised thing. There's so many football teams that generally every town has a football team, every village has a football team, and people support that where they grow up. It is becoming more of a Premier League centric kind of country now, but generally, if you live in Bristol, you're going to support Bristol Rovers or Bristol City. You live in Sheffield, you're going to support Sheffield United or Sheffield Wednesday. You live in Coventry, you're going to support Coventry. It's your local team. You might have a favourite team in the Premier League or something, but generally you're going to support that team who is near you. So for all those fans of Wimbledon who, are you then going to make that, if you lived near Wimbledon in South London, are you going to make the 3-hour trip to Milton Keynes? No, of course you're not. So they set up their own team, who are now in the same league as the MK Dons, which is quite funny when you think about it. They rose from the non-league and rose up through the rankings, so fair play to them for that. I don't dislike the MK Dons personally, but I think what happened was a travesty, and should never ever happen again. I know it's a fairly common thing to happen in America, where owners kind of own a football club and can move it around. But it's, I think, because of the history of football clubs, a lot of football clubs are over 100 years old, and to just move that and erase all that history is sacrilege, basically. So yeah, anyway, the FA Cup, that's the kind of romance behind the FA Cup. Essentially, that non-league teams can play against these big teams, and in a lot of cases, for example, if Man United were to play a non-league side, they generally would play at Old Trafford. Even if the non-league side were drawn at home, they would switch to Old Trafford because their home stadium might hold like 1,500 people, but Old Trafford holds like 80,000, because they share the gate receipts. That's the way it works. So they generally would get a few million in gate receipts, which would, that non-league side, that would keep them going for years. So it can be a good thing, but it's, unfortunately, it's fairly rare that it happens nowadays. The EFL Cup is slightly different, or what is the Carabao Cup this season. This cup is only for English League clubs, or what they count as the English League, which is Premier League, Championship, League One, League Two, not anything below that, basically. So these teams play again. The Premier League. Do they go in straight away? No, they don't. So Premier League clubs don't go in straight away. I believe they come in around the second round. I think like the quarterfinals and semi-finals are played over two legs, so home and away, and then the final is played at Wembley. The final generally happens fairly early. I think it's like around about February, March time, which is fairly early. The football season generally ends around June. The FA Cup is always the last game of the season, so it always happens after the week after the last game of the football season. And yeah, if games are drawn, you then have a penalty shootout as well. Teams don't like the EFL Cup because it's really seen as a really second-rate competition, even though it has the same prize as the FA Cup, which is to get into the Europa League, but it is seen as just a secondary cup, really. Some of the names who have won it have not been some of the biggest, although recent years it's gone back to being more the top clubs. Interestingly, Birmingham, I think, won it and got relegated that season, or maybe they were already in the Championship and won it, so they got into Europe despite being in the Championship. But it was it's not a popular club, and sometimes Premier League sides will field weakened teams in it, because from the kind of elite teams in the Premier League, or what's known as kind of the top six, which is generally like Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man City, Man United, Tottenham, generally they pay their attentions towards getting into the Champions League for that prestige and the extra money, and trying to win the league. They kind of don't care too much about the cups. They're kind of a secondary thing, although often, for example, if your team is kind of out of the running of winning the league, they will focus their attentions more onto the cups because it's a trophy at the end of the day for the team. So now I've spent like God knows how long rambling about how the English kind of Premier League works. We'll go for a brief kind of overview of if there's any differences in the other European leagues. So we have the Spanish league. The Spanish league, the only difference here really is the Spanish league is not as rich as the English league, but the reason why Barcelona and Real Madrid are so much richer than a lot of the clubs in the Premier League is because in the Premier League the TV rights are negotiated by the Premier League itself and then shared amongst all the teams. Some teams might get a 5% more because they're a bigger side. They might be featured a few times, like a Man United or a Chelsea. but generally they get about the same. In Spain, the TV rights are negotiated on a team-by-team basis. Therefore, Real Madrid and Barcelona make way more money from TV rights than any other team in the league. You can debate on what is a fair system and what isn't a fair system. At the end of the day, Real Madrid and Barcelona are two of the biggest sides in the world, and they are that because of this reason. If you distributed it evenly, there would be massive problems at those clubs. But anyway, so that's kind of the difference there. Again, they still have relegation and European places, very similar to the Premier League. Germany's exactly the same. Italy's exactly the same as well. Portugal's the same. France is the same. So generally all the European leagues work on the same basis as the Premier League, in that there's relegation and European places at the top. It's just the difference is solely in the amount of money that the league makes. As I said, the English Premier League, one of the reasons, I mean, there's a whole history of why it became what it is, which is the richest league in the world. Generally, what happened was it was generally about branding, really. It was a marketing thing. It used to be called the First Division. It rebranded to be the Premiership, I think, and then it became the Premier League or Premier Division, whatever you want to call it. And it was Sky TV kind of took the rights and rebranded it, and everything became a bit more kind of razzmatazz, a bit more kind of Americanized, actually, really. And as a result, other leagues in Europe weren't really doing quite the same thing, because it used to be, when I was growing up, like around the 90s, Italy was the biggest league in the world, pretty much. The teams in Italy were like the biggest teams, the best teams. You still had the big teams in Spain, but they weren't what they were. But now Italy's really fallen, down the rankings a lot. In their teams have fallen down a lot of what they used to be, because of money. Basically, if you can attract, if you can pay higher wages to players, if you can pay more money for them and to them, you will attract those players. Call it greed, call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, if I'm a footballer and Man United are going to pay me £50 million, or AC Milan are going to pay me 15, you can't blame me if I'm going to go to Man United. If I don't have any set allegiance between the two teams, you can't really blame me for going to Man United, can you? It's just the way of things, really. So eventually it kind of all changed there. Foreign ownership in the Premier League came in. Teams had more money, with how they go. So, I hope this has kind of been a vaguely informative kind of look at the league structure, I guess, of how it all works and some of the intricacies. Football Manager is a fantastic game. As I said, incredibly in-depth, and if you love statistics and things like that, it's a great game. But my God, just be prepared to sink a lot of your time into it. But I think I've pretty much covered a lot of the bases. Oh, I guess we can just have a look quickly at the European competitions. Let's see if I can find them. There are other cups, by the way, which are played. I'm not going to go through them too much. Cup competitions. International. No. Okay. Let's do this the easy way and just go to a team who is in the Champions League. Oh my God, why can't I even find this? I've forgotten how to even search for this stuff. They should have something here relating to it. God, why can I not find it? There we go. Use the Eurocup. So the two European Cups are now kind of in line where they have mini league systems. So generally, once you get through the qualifying rounds, which is where some of the weaker teams play each other, you get into a league system where teams are split into different leagues. Once the leagues, I think it's the top two teams from the leagues kind of go through, you then have a system where it goes more to just traditional cup competition, and that's this is the Europa League. They don't have the naming rights for it, I don't think. And then you have the Champions League, or the European Cup. It does the same thing. You have qualifying rounds. It goes into a league system, and then the teams then go into a kind of more of a knockout stage with a two-leg system. So they play home and away through until there's two teams left who play at a neutral venue for the final. Again, the venue is actually picked before the final was decided. So, for example, when Chelsea played Bayern Munich, it was played at Bayern Munich Stadium because that had already been chosen as the venue for the final. So it wasn't technically kind of like a neutral venue, but Chelsea still won. So fair play to them, even though they were big underdogs there. And as I said, the European Cup, Champions League, whatever you want to call it, is generally considered the pinnacle of success. So for a team to win this competition is generally seen as being the best team in the world, I guess. Not kind of technically, I guess, correct in a way, but this is probably as close as something like the NBA or I guess the equivalent would be like the NBA, the way that works. You have these mini leagues, the top teams from there go through and then play each other in playoffs. The playoffs there, I know, are a lot more games, but it doesn't quite work out with football to play each other like 8 times or whatever the hell it is. And then through to a final game, a more one-off game. And then, the winner takes it all. I mean, as I said, there's an argument to say, that Chelsea team in 2011, 2012, I think even Chelsea fans would probably agree with me there, were not the best team in Europe. They won. They were incredibly lucky to win in that final. Now, fair play to them, they did win it, and I'm not going to take anything away from that, but I wouldn't necessarily say the best team won that year. And in some years, it's not necessarily the best team who does win. But a lot of years it is. To be fair, you see Real Madrid win a lot. They do love this competition. Last time an English team won was Chelsea in 2011-2012. And the 98-99 season when Man United won is considered one of the greatest seasons, when Man United won the treble, which was the FA Cup, the League and the Champions League, and one of the most dramatic matches in football history, where Man United came from behind with minutes to spare to win. Really was a incredibly dramatic match. Also, this Liverpool game against AC Milan is another one which was just incredible. I think Liverpool were I can't remember exactly, they were 3-0 down at half time to AC Milan, and then they won on penalties. I think it was called the Miracle of Istanbul because it was just a miracle basically. But AC Milan got their revenge a couple of seasons later. I think that kind of covers basically the way it works. Now in these European Cup competitions, teams from all over Europe play. So even some real small clubs play in these kind of matches, and it can be a big thing for that club to get through to the group stage where they're guaranteed income. If we have a look at the rules, it doesn't tell you prize money here, but prize money is quite a lot. Yeah, it doesn't actually tell you prize money or anything like that. Oh no, hang on, group stage. Yeah, so per win in the group stage you get 1.29 million. If we go to the final, what does the winner get? The winner prize money is 13 million, which isn't really a lot, especially when you compare it to the league, but it's the prestige, the marketing and promotion and the whole side of things which go in is what's worth so much more than that as well. One final thing to just touch on, I guess, is the one I kind of said before, that with the English league there is not many release clauses. In Spain they do have a lot of release clauses, so you can see here Neymar, minimum fee release clause 172 million. So essentially what happens in Spain is slightly different to England, where in order for a transfer to happen, the player has to buy out the contract. But what happens is the team gives the player the money to buy out the contract, so it's kind of irrelevant. But so what happened with Neymar was he paid the fee isn't paid to the club, the fee is paid to the league. The league then gives the club the money. It's kind of a weird system, but that's basically what happens. So as I said, I think like every player has a minimum fee release clause. So Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez will have one as well. I don't know if it's a rule that they have to have one, but it does look like it is kind of a thing where they have to have, which is why they're usually so high on there. But that's the kind of a slight difference there. Whereas, so in Spain, any player could technically, go anywhere. Cristiano Ronaldo, 161 million. I mean, if anyone's going to pay that for Ronaldo, fair play to you. Yeah, which means that any player could technically leave the club during the transfer window. In reality, it wouldn't really happen that much. There's not many teams who can afford that amount of money. Obviously, Paris Saint-Germain were one of the clubs who could, I guess. But in England, if, for example, Alexis Sanchez wanted to leave, he couldn't. Now, actually, the one thing I did not talk about was what happens when their contract expires, because when you have so here, for example, Alexis Sanchez's contract expires on the 30th of June 2018, which is coming up, isn't it? It's like next year. So what happens when the contract expires? It used to be nothing, like the player would still be at the club and the club can still sell him. But then some guy came in called John Bosman, who actually took his club to court and said, well, if I'm no longer in contract, I can just leave the club. I'm out of contract, I can just leave. And he won. And what that came about was the Bosman Ruling, where I think it's for players who are over 22, 23. If their contract runs out, they leave the club for free. The club gets nothing. So when Sanchez's contract runs out, it's widely speculated he's going to join Man City, and Arsenal will not get one single penny from that, which is why people were debating whether or not they should have sold him at the beginning of the season and got 50-60 million, or let him go at the end of the season for free. But you get the player for that season, so it's complicated, but yeah, that's the way it works. If the player is under, I think, 23, then what happens is they go to a tribunal, and the tribunal decides upon the price of the player. It's not generally like a hugely inflated price, but it usually is like, I don't know, like a reasonable price for that player. It's to protect young players from just leaving and the club getting nothing after they may have developed that player for 10 years or something in some cases. So that did change the market somewhat. what happens as well is the player is allowed to, 6 months before their contract runs out, they're allowed to negotiate with other clubs to join them at the end of the season. So I guess on like the 1st of January or whatever it will be, Alexis Sanchez will be free to sign a contract with Man City to join them at the end of the season when his contract runs out. What can also happen is the transfer window reopens for the month of January. So potentially Arsenal could sell him then, but it would obviously be for a very cut down price. They'd be lucky to probably get 20 million because the club knows 6 months later they can just sign him for nothing. So it's whatever that's kind of worth, I guess. So clubs need to be very diligent upon contracts for players, especially younger players, because if you have a younger player who's perhaps just breaking through, you may have him, he may have just broken through and his contract runs out in like the season or season after, and then he may have a big club sniffing around, but at that point he may have turned 23, 24 and can leave for free, and you basically get nothing for it. So you have to be careful. On the other side of things, it does also allow clubs without a lot of money to pull in players who they couldn't afford a transfer fee for free, because maybe that player just hasn't worked out at the club and their contracts run out. So it's been a good and a bad thing, I guess, for players. It has led to players having more power. So, for example, Alexis Sanchez, he could sit there and go to Arsenal, well, Arsenal, I'll stay if you pay me 250,000 a week. And Arsenal can go, oh shit, if we're not going to, and in the past they could be like, okay, we're not going to pay you that, so we're just going to sell you, get money. And now it's kind of like, oh well, if we don't pay him that, he just leaves for free. But if we do pay him that, we're overpaying for this player. So it's put the ball in the court of the players a lot more than the clubs, which some people argue is a better thing, but some people argue isn't, because generally players are ruled by their agents, and the agents are generally after one thing, and it's money, and that money is going in the pockets of the agents rather than most other people where it should be going, if that makes sense. But that's a whole other subject anyway. So yeah, that was probably the one thing on the transfer side that I didn't go through actually. But I think that's it. My throat hurts now anyway, so I'm going to stop talking. But thanks for watching as always. It's been my pleasure. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll try and answer them. Till next time. See you later.